China, 1864, a city lies in silence, not the quiet of peace, but the deafening absence of life. Nanjing, the former stronghold of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, is a graveyard of destruction. The once thriving city is now a shadow of itself, its streets lined with crumbling buildings and broken lives. The air hangs heavy with the acrid scent of gunpowder, mingling with the stench of decay. Survivors, those fortunate or unfortunate enough to endure, sift through the ruins in search of scraps to sustain their fragile existence. Children cry out in hunger, their voices barely cutting through the oppressive gloom. The Yangtze River, which once brought prosperity to the region, now flows murky and red, carrying remnants of the battle downstream. On its banks, soldiers lay still, their uniforms caked with mud and blood, indistinguishable from one another. Among them, remnants of the rebellion's banners flutter weakly in the wind, a futile reminder of a cause that consumed so many lives. Above it all, the shattered walls of the city tell a story of relentless sieges, merciless bombardments, and a conflict that spiraled out of anyone's control. More than 20 million lives were lost, not just soldiers, but farmers, traders, children, and the elderly. Yet despite the scale of this catastrophe, the story of the Taiping Rebellion remains largely unknown to many outside China. This is the tale of a rebellion born from one man's vision, a man who believed he was chosen by a higher power to lead his people out of suffering. It is a story of promises and betrayal, hope and despair, ambition and devastation. The Taiping Rebellion was not merely a conflict, it was a revolution that challenged the very fabric of a nation. It uprooted dynasties, redrew allegiances, and scarred generations. For over a decade, the rebellion tore through China's heartland, leaving behind devastation on a scale unparalleled in the 19th century. Cities burned, entire populations were uprooted, and villages vanished, swallowed by the relentless tide of war. It reshaped not only China, but also the perceptions of colonial powers watching from afar. And yet this deadly civil war has been largely overshadowed by other historical events, leaving many to wonder how a conflict of this magnitude could fade from global memory. What drove this rebellion to such deadly heights? Who were its leaders, its followers, and its victims? And how did the Qing dynasty, already weakened by foreign incursions and internal corruption, manage to endure such a brutal challenge? This is the story of the Taiping Rebellion, the deadliest civil war you've never heard of, and how its legacy echoes even today, etched into the landscape and the psyche of a nation that has risen from its ashes. Welcome to History's Untold Secrets, the channel dedicated to uncovering the forgotten and mysterious events that have shaped the world as we know it. Here we delve into the untold stories, the hidden chapters of history that remain shrouded in obscurity, waiting to be brought to light. In today's episode, we turn our attention to a conflict that redefined the very essence of tragedy in the 19th century. It was a war fought not between nations, but within a single country, China, resulting in devastation on an unimaginable scale. It was a war that claimed over 20 million lives, making it one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, yet it remains largely absent from the global consciousness. This is the story of the Taiping Rebellion. It begins with the vision of one man, a failed scholar who believed himself to be the younger brother of Jesus Christ. Fueled by this conviction, he would gather an army of millions, united by the promise of a utopian society. However, what unfolded was a tale of chaos, betrayal, and bloodshed, leaving behind a legacy of devastation. In this episode, we'll explore the origins of this rebellion, tracing its unlikely beginnings to a small rural village in southern China. We'll uncover the rise of Hong Xiuquan, whose religious zeal and charismatic leadership inspired a movement that grew into a full-fledged civil war. We'll also unravel the horrors that ensued as the rebellion spread, consuming entire provinces and tearing apart families, communities, and a nation. We'll take you through the battlefields, the sieges, and the lives caught in the crossfire of history. Through public records, official accounts, and first-hand testimonies, we'll uncover the layers of this forgotten conflict, from its dreams of equality and reform to its descent into violence and suffering. And finally, we'll examine the impact this rebellion had on China and the world, as well as the mysteries and questions that linger to this day. Prepare yourself for a story of ambition, faith, and devastation. This is the Taiping Rebellion, and this is history's untold secrets. The mid-19th century was a period of profound instability in China. The Qing dynasty, which had ruled for over 2 centuries, found itself mired in corruption, plagued by inefficiency, and unable to address the growing dissatisfaction among its people. The ruling class, entrenched in privilege, failed to grasp the scale of the challenges they faced. Wars with foreign powers, most notably the Opium Wars, had not only drained the imperial treasury, but had also exposed the empire's military and technological vulnerabilities. The Treaty of Nanking, signed in 1842, ceded Hong Kong to the British and opened numerous ports to foreign trade, further eroding the sovereignty of the Qing state. At the same time, natural disasters, famine, and economic hardship ravaged the countryside. Tens of millions of peasants, who formed the backbone of Chinese society, struggled to survive in a system that seemed indifferent to their suffering. These grievances created fertile ground for rebellion, as dissatisfaction simmered just beneath the surface of society. It was during this period of turmoil that a man named Hong Xiuquan emerged. Born in 1814 in a small village in Guangdong province, Hong came from humble beginnings. His family was part of the Hakka community, a marginalized ethnic subgroup within China, often excluded from mainstream society and denied access to fertile land. Despite his modest upbringing, Hong was ambitious and excelled in his early education. Like many of his contemporaries, he sought to improve his standing through the imperial examination system, a rigorous series of tests that offered the prospect of upward mobility for those who succeeded. However, success eluded him. Hong failed the imperial exams not once, but multiple times, a common occurrence in a system that admitted only a fraction of its candidates. Each failure weighed heavily on him, and it was during this period of personal despair that he experienced a series of vivid dreams that would alter the course of his life. In these visions, he claimed to see a divine figure who identified himself as God and instructed Hong to destroy demons and purify China. Convinced of his divine mandate, Hong believed he was chosen to lead his people out of their suffering. Hong Xiuquan. At the center of this extraordinary story was Hong Xiuquan, a man whose charisma and conviction would draw millions to his cause. Hong's interpretation of his dreams led him to declare that he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ. This revelation, though unorthodox and widely disputed, became the foundation of his religious movement. Hong's message was simple but powerful. He promised salvation, equality, and the creation of a utopian society, free from the corruption and exploitation that defined Qing rule. For many who had lost faith in the imperial government, Hong's vision offered hope. The Qing dynasty officials. On the other side of the conflict stood the Qing dynasty, an imperial system steeped in tradition, but increasingly incapable of addressing the challenges it faced. The dynasty's officials, while aware of the brewing discontent, often underestimated the scale of the rebellion until it was too late. They were also distracted by external pressures, as foreign powers sought to exploit China's weakness for their own gain. The followers, Taiping Army. Hong's vision resonated deeply with the disenfranchised, particularly farmers, miners, and laborers who bore the brunt of the Qing dynasty's failures. These individuals, united by shared grievances and the promise of a better future, became the backbone of the Taiping Army. As the movement grew, it attracted not only peasants, but also intellectuals, merchants, and even former Qing officials, all of whom saw an opportunity for change. The Taiping Army, named after Hong's vision of heavenly peace, grew rapidly, swelling to hundreds of thousands of soldiers. In 1850, Hong Xiuquan officially declared the establishment of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, a new state that sought to replace the Qing dynasty. He crowned himself the Heavenly King and began implementing a radical agenda that aimed to reshape Chinese society. The movement called for the abolition of the class system, the redistribution of land, and the eradication of traditional practices such as foot binding and opium use. Women were granted equal status within the movement, a revolutionary concept in a deeply patriarchal society. Hong's followers enforced strict discipline and adhered to a code of conduct that reflected his religious teachings. The rebellion began in earnest in Guangxi province, where the Taiping forces clashed with Qing troops in a series of bloody battles. The Taiping army's early successes were stunning, as they captured city after city, often leaving devastation in their wake. By 1853, the rebellion had reached its zenith with the capture of Nanjing, which was declared the capital of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. However, the establishment of this new order was far from peaceful. Internal divisions, power struggles, and the challenges of governance began to emerge. Hong Xiuquan's leadership, once an asset, became a source of conflict as his decisions grew increasingly erratic. What had started as a vision of utopia quickly descended into chaos and carnage, with the rebellion's leaders turning on one another and the Qing forces launching a brutal counteroffensive. The stage was set for one of the most devastating conflicts in history, a war that would consume millions of lives and leave a legacy of destruction that still echoes today. In 1850, the Taiping Rebellion ignited in Guangxi province, a region already simmering with discontent. Peasants burdened by heavy taxes, a collapsing agricultural economy, and persistent natural disasters were desperate for change. Hong Xiuquan's message, a combination of religious salvation and social reform, resonated deeply among these struggling communities. As his following grew, what began as a grassroots movement quickly transformed into a formidable military force. By 1851, Hong's forces declared their rebellion against the Qing dynasty, naming it the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. Their early successes caught the imperial government by surprise. Qing forces, already stretched thin by multiple internal and external conflicts, found themselves unable to contain the rebellion. The Taiping army, disciplined and fueled by their leader's vision, began to carve a path of conquest across southern China. The rebellion's first major victory came in 1853 when the Taiping army captured Nanjing, a city of immense strategic and symbolic importance. Once the capital of China during previous dynasties, Nanjing became the heart of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. Renamed Tianjing, or the Heavenly Capital, it was here that Hong Xiuquan established his court and began to implement his vision of a new society. From this stronghold, the Taiping forces launched campaigns into surrounding provinces, their influence spreading rapidly. But the rebellion's expansion came at a heavy cost. The Taiping army employed brutal tactics to ensure their dominance. Cities that resisted their advance were often razed to the ground. Populations that refused to align with their cause faced unspeakable consequences. Entire villages were destroyed, and prisoners were executed without hesitation. The Qing forces, determined to crush the rebellion, responded in kind, leading to battles of unparalleled savagery. Civilians often found themselves caught in the crossfire, victims of famine, disease, and indiscriminate violence. By the mid-1850s, the conflict had escalated into a humanitarian catastrophe, with millions of lives lost and vast stretches of the countryside left desolate. As the rebellion raged, questions arose about its true nature and motivations. Historians and contemporary observers alike debated whether the Taiping movement was primarily a religious crusade or a political rebellion aimed at overthrowing the Qing dynasty. One perspective emphasizes the religious fervor that drove the rebellion. Hong Xiuquan's claim to divine authority as the younger brother of Jesus Christ placed religion at the center of the movement. His vision of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, with its strict moral code and theocratic governance, reflected his interpretation of Christianity. The Taiping army's success in converting large segments of the population further underscores the role of faith as a unifying force. Yet others argue that the rebellion was more political than religious. The Qing dynasty, weakened by corruption and foreign incursions, presented an inviting target for ambitious reformers. The Taiping agenda, which included land redistribution, gender equality, and the eradication of traditional practices like foot binding, challenged the social and political norms of the time. These reforms, while radical, were also practical solutions to the deep-seated inequalities and injustices faced by the Chinese people. In this context, the rebellion can be seen as a response to the systemic failures of the Qing government rather than purely a spiritual movement. The internal dynamics of the Taiping leadership also provide insight into the rebellion's decline. Hong Xiuquan's increasing paranoia and detachment from his generals created significant divisions within the movement. Over time, Hong withdrew from day-to-day governance, spending much of his time in isolation within his palace in Nanjing. His inability to delegate authority effectively led to power struggles among his subordinates, further weakening the movement's cohesion. Prominent leaders within the Taiping hierarchy began to act independently, pursuing their own interests rather than the collective goals of the rebellion. This fragmentation was compounded by Hong's reluctance to adapt to changing circumstances. His strict adherence to his religious vision often conflicted with the practical realities of governance and warfare, alienating many of his followers. As the Qing forces regrouped and modernized their military with the assistance of foreign advisors, the Taiping army's early advantages were gradually eroded. But as the rebellion entered its final stages, a critical question emerged. What drove Hong Xiuquan to such extremes? Was his vision of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom a genuine attempt to create a better society, or the delusion of a man consumed by his own ambitions? The answers to these questions remain elusive, shrouded in the chaos and devastation of one of history's deadliest conflicts. As the Qing forces closed in on Nanjing, the once mighty Taiping army faced its darkest hour. What would become of the rebellion, and how would its legacy shape the future of China? The answers lie in the final, desperate days of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, a story of betrayal, collapse, and the enduring scars of a war that changed the course of history. In the aftermath of the Taiping Rebellion, the once glorious city of Nanjing stood as a grim monument to a conflict that had engulfed a nation. When Qing forces finally breached its walls in 1864, what they found within painted a chilling portrait of the rebellion's final days. Amid the ruins were documents and artifacts that revealed the true nature of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. A society built on fear, faith, and the iron grip of its leader, Hong Xiuquan. Recovered documents provided a rare glimpse into the regime's inner workings. These records outlined a rigid social hierarchy under Hong's rule, where even minor infractions were met with severe punishment. Witness accounts later compiled by Qing officials and Western observers describe public executions carried out in the name of maintaining discipline. Those who questioned the leadership or failed to adhere to the movement's strict religious code faced brutal consequences. Forced labor camps operated throughout the kingdom, with men, women, and even children conscripted to build fortifications, maintain supply lines, and work in fields to support the rebellion's war effort. Hong Xiuquan himself became increasingly isolated during the rebellion's final years. Accounts suggest that he retreated to his palace, surrounded by luxury even as his followers starved. He claimed that God would deliver victory, refusing to acknowledge the crumbling state of his kingdom. This detachment from reality not only alienated his generals, but also deepened the suffering of his people. As famine and disease swept through the heavenly kingdom, the once loyal Taiping army began to desert in droves, unable to endure the growing desperation. Qing government records from this period, now preserved in historical archives, highlight the staggering toll of the rebellion. Conservative estimates place the death toll at over 20 million, a figure that includes not only soldiers, but also civilians who succumbed to starvation, illness, and violence. Entire regions were left depopulated, with villages wiped off the map and farmlands abandoned. The rebellion's destruction extended far beyond the battlefield, leaving scars that would take generations to heal. In 1864, after years of relentless conflict, the Qing forces launched a final assault on Nanjing. By this time, the dynasty had received significant assistance from Western powers, including British and French mercenaries who provided training and modern weaponry. These alliances, forged out of mutual interest in suppressing the rebellion, tipped the scales in favor of the Qing. As Qing troops closed in on the city, Hong Xiuquan's grip on power disintegrated completely. Facing inevitable defeat, he reportedly ingested poison rather than surrender. His death, however, did not mark the end of the suffering. The fall of Nanjing was accompanied by a wave of retribution as Qing soldiers exacted revenge on the surviving Taiping population. The city was razed, and its remaining inhabitants faced mass executions. The aftermath of the rebellion was catastrophic. Entire regions of China lay in ruins, with infrastructure destroyed and communities decimated. The social fabric of the nation was irreparably damaged, as trust between different ethnic and social groups disintegrated in the wake of the violence. The Qing dynasty, though victorious, emerged from the conflict severely weakened. The immense cost of the war, both in human lives and economic resources, left the empire vulnerable to further internal strife and foreign exploitation. Despite the rebellion's defeat, its ideals and consequences lingered. The Taiping Heavenly Kingdom had challenged the traditional social order, proposing radical reforms that resonated with many marginalized groups. Though the movement failed to achieve its goals, it inspired future reformers and revolutionaries who sought to reshape China in the decades to come. The Taiping Rebellion exposed the deep fractures within the Qing dynasty, fractures that would eventually contribute to its collapse in the early 20th century. The dynasty's inability to address the root causes of the rebellion, widespread poverty, systemic corruption, and social inequality, underscored its declining legitimacy. In the years following the rebellion, these issues would continue to fester, culminating in the fall of the Qing dynasty and the emergence of modern China. Globally, the rebellion set a precedent for movements that combined religious zeal with political ambition. Hong Xiuquan's vision of a theocratic state, though deeply flawed, demonstrated the power of ideology in mobilizing large-scale uprisings. Similar dynamics would emerge in other parts of the world, where charismatic leaders used faith as a tool to challenge established orders. The rebellion also served as a grim reminder of the devastating human cost of civil war. The scale of the destruction, the suffering of the population, and the enduring scars left by the conflict resonate as cautionary lessons for future generations. While the Taiping Rebellion is often overshadowed by other historical events, its impact on China and the world remains profound. Today, the ruins of Nanjing and the records preserved in archives stand as silent witnesses to a chapter of history that must not be forgotten. The Taiping Rebellion was more than a conflict. It was a transformative moment in China's history, one that reshaped the nation and left a legacy that continues to inform its path forward. The Taiping Rebellion stands as one of the deadliest and most transformative events in history. Spanning over a decade, this monumental civil war reshaped the physical, political, and cultural landscape of China. Its origins, rooted in one man's vision and the widespread desperation of the people, gave rise to a movement that challenged an empire. Yet the devastation it unleashed went far beyond its initial ideals. With a death toll exceeding 20 million, the rebellion left scars that resonate even today. Entire regions were depopulated, cities destroyed, and communities torn apart by the relentless cycles of conflict. It was a war fought with extraordinary brutality, where no corner of society was spared. Civilians bore the brunt of the suffering, trapped between the ambitions of a revolutionary movement and the iron fist of an embattled dynasty. For the Qing government, victory came at a tremendous cost, weakening its foundation and accelerating its eventual decline. Despite its catastrophic end, the Taiping Rebellion highlighted deep fractures within the Qing dynasty and exposed the pervasive inequality that fueled such a massive uprising. While its ideals were flawed in execution, they sparked a conversation about reform and modernization, setting the stage for future movements that would challenge the old order. To this day, the Taiping Rebellion remains a stark reminder of how ideology, desperation, and ambition can collide with devastating consequences, altering the trajectory of history. What can be learned from the tragedy of the Taiping Rebellion? It serves as a sobering example of what can happen when systemic inequality and widespread suffering go unaddressed. It also raises questions about the power of charismatic leaders and the dangers of movements driven by absolute conviction. The promises of reform and salvation may inspire hope, but when combined with unchecked authority and rigid ideology, they can spiral into disaster. As we reflect on this chapter of history, it is worth considering whether the conditions that gave rise to the Taiping Rebellion could manifest again in different forms. In a world still grappling with inequality, social unrest, and ideological divides, the story of the Taiping Rebellion offers valuable lessons on the complexities of governance, the fragility of societal structures, and the human cost of conflict. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of history's most extraordinary and forgotten events. If you found this story compelling, we encourage you to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who are passionate about uncovering the hidden stories of the past. Your support helps us continue to bring you more untold secrets from history. We'd also love to hear your thoughts.